there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 5 of our 6-part Kaladesh full set review. Today we're going to look at all of the green cards, and we're going to wrap up the rest of the multicolor cards in the set. We'll be looking at Simic as well as Selesnya today. So if you've been watching the series up until this point, we've looked at all of the white cards, all of the blue, the black, the red. Today, of course, we're doing green. Tomorrow we'll be back with the rest of the set. So we'll look at the colorless cards and the lands, which basically will include the artifacts and the non-basic lands in the set. The following day, we'll be back with a pre-release primer. Now, if you watch my pre-release primers in the past, this one's not going to be too different. I usually try to gear those towards new players, let them know what to expect if they've never gone to a pre-release before. But I'm also going to talk about inventions in that video, so if you're curious on my thoughts on inventions, I'll have time to discuss them there. Before we get started, quickly to talk about green, if you check out the description box below, you'll see a link to my Amazon affiliate store, and if you make any purchases there, a small percentage comes back to support the channel. Also, you can find us on Patreon, where you can support us there too as another option. So thank you to everyone who's made purchases through those links, and of course, as always, thank you to the patrons on Patreon. It really helps and makes these videos possible. So let's move on to the cards themselves. First, we'll talk about green in general as a color. So if you're drafting green, there's a few different directions you can go. If you go green-white, the Selesnya colors, they actually work really well together. Green has a fair amount of fabricate. White has probably a little more fabricate. Together, they can really create a pretty wide team of servo tokens. And on top of that, white has the flicker effects available to you. So you can flicker some of these fabricate cards, you can flicker some of the energy creation cards in green that give you energy when they enter the battlefield, and you can find some extra value in those cards. Now, if you go Simic, if you go with green-blue, you're going to find a lot of ways to generate energy. Energy is a big theme for both of those colors, and there's some pretty good energy payoffs in those colors as well. On top of that, similar to white, blue can bounce cards, so you're able to perhaps bounce some of your own stuff, replay it, and get those enter the battlefield effects and get more value out of those cards as well. If you go black-green with Golgari, you're going to find in some ways it's similar to white with a strong focus on fabrication. However, what black's trying to do with the tokens is a little different than what white's trying to do. Black's going to want to sacrifice them to get more power and more abilities out of their cards, and it can make for an interesting combination. And finally, if you go Gruul, green and red, it's all about the beatdowns. You get some big stompy creatures, you get the trample creatures. There's a lot of really economical creatures in those two colors. It feels like it could be a really strong archetype. They both also play around with energy quite a bit, so a lot of big energy payoffs in those two colors as well. And red also brings a fair amount of direct damage to the table, which could be important to compensate for traditionally what's one of green's weaknesses, which is taking care of creatures on the battlefield. So having said that, let's move into the individual cards. First, we have Appetite for the Unnatural. Now, typically, I would say this is just a sideboard card. You bring it in to deal with a problematic artifact or enchantment. However, in this set, there's so many artifacts that this is very main deckable. Now, notice many times these type of abilities only cost 2. This time it costs 3, but they give you the extra bonus of gaining 2 life. Now, the reason they're doing that is they're trying to slow the game down a little bit. They want you to be able to have a chance at least to play with your artifacts a little bit before destruction spells start to take over the game. So you're going to see that as a common theme. You're not going to see any shatters in this set. I mean, artifact destruction is more along the 3 or 4 drop level, so this is going to be just fine for you in limited. Arborbackstopper, this is a good one. I'm actually really impressed with this card. 5/4 trampler for 5, and when it enters the battlefield, you gain 5 life. And like I mentioned, there's a lot of bounce effects, there's a lot of flicker effects in this set. This feels like maybe a fixed or at least calmed down version of Thragtusk. Sure, it won't be quite as good as that card, but it's still going to be really good, I think. This is going to be very, very standard playable. I'm sure it's going to see a lot of play in standard for some time to come, actually. And also, of course, without saying, huge bomb in limited if you're lucky enough to get one of these. They're uncommon, so in theory you might even be able to grab a couple of these in a deck, which is actually pretty awesome. Architect of the Untamed. Here's one of those cards that has a pretty big energy payoff, and it's also a nice way to generate energy throughout the game. It's just not a one-time shot. And on top of that, you also get a 2/3 body for 3, which is incredibly serviceable all on its own and limited. So I think this is a great limited card. A couple of reasons. Like I said, size-wise, it's fine for what you're paying. Secondly, every time I play a land, I get an energy counter. That's going to continue on as the game goes. The payoff of 8 energy for the 6/6 token is pretty good actually. Like, it kind of feels like a lot, and you say to yourself, well, it's a 6/6, it doesn't have evasion. However, you got to kind of look at it this way. If I have a bunch of energy in my energy pool and I use it to get a 6/6 creature, I haven't really wasted my turn or anything. I still have all my lands to tap. So if I can get a 6/6 token and play like a 5/5 trample creature or something in the same turn, that's a huge swing. You're using a resource aside from your mana to get something rather sizable. It's actually a good energy payoff in the long term, especially if you have a lot of ways to create energy throughout the game. So keep an eye on this one. I think potentially this could see some standard play if the right deck's out there. Again, we're going into a very aggressive standard environment. It's actually been aggressive for a little while now. It's become recently more controlling and a little slower. So it just depends on what happens next to the metagame. If this type of style of deck can get there in the current climate, then you may see it. If it doesn't right now, I think post-rotation you will see more decks that can be a little bit slower and methodical like this one. So keep an eye on it. At some point, I think it will see play in standard. Armorcraft Judge. This is kind of nice if you have cards that already have +1/+1 counters on it. So think of it this way. A 3/3 for 4 in limited, again, that's very serviceable. That's a fine 4-drop for you. No harm, no foul if you don't get the ability. But if you have a lot of ways, and green gives you plenty of opportunity to put counters on creatures, this is a very good card in those situations. So I think it's a very strong limited card. I think it's a little situational for standard. You don't want to draw into this when you don't have creatures with counters on them, because you don't want to take the time to spend a 3/3 for 4 in that particular format. It's just too strong. But in limited, it's just fine regardless. Attune with Ether. This time around, you get one of these cards that lets you search for a land, but you get bonus of 2 energy on top of it. All this for 1 green mana. That's actually pretty awesome. And this is nice if you want to color fix in limited. So I'm going a little deeper with 3 colors, or I'm slashing a 3rd color. This is a good card that I can put in my deck, and I still get energy on top of everything else. And you know what? If I draw this later when I don't need it anymore, at least I'm still getting 2 energy out of it. It's not a completely dead card, which is cool. Blossoming Defense, very good combat trick for green. It only costs 1, it's at instant speed, +2/+2, and hexproof. So not only is it a good combat trick to use in blocking or attacking, but it's also good to guard against spot removal. I really like this card. I'd be happy to run even a couple of these in my deck if I'm playing green. It's going to have a lot of different uses. It's very versatile. Brigstling Hydra, another strong creature. This one is another impressive one for me. You're paying 4 for 4/3. You're getting 3 energy in your energy pool, and that 3 energy, or any 3 energy, can be converted to give this thing a +1/+1 counter and hexproof till end of turn. So it can kind of protect itself. It's a big creature that's cheap with the ability to protect itself. All right, sign me up. I'm on board for this. Now, granted, like many Hydras, it doesn't have trample, but I still think it's good for what you're paying for it. And the fact that you can potentially use your energy to keep this thing alive and make it bigger is a pretty big deal. So this is one of those cards you play for 4 mana. You don't use your energy right away to pump it. You kind of hold off as long as you possibly can. And I would say I'd always try to keep 3 energy banked just to protect this against instant removal at any time, right? If I have extra energy, I might be a little more liberal about pumping it up, but I don't necessarily have to be until the time's right. So that's actually pretty awesome. I do think this could see some standard play because of its aggressive costing, and on top of that, it's another card that will be a bomb for you in limited. Commencement of Festivities. So it's a fog effect. Now notice it's only combat damage that would be dealt to players that's prevented, so not to creatures, so I think that's important to note. But at the same time, I'm only a fan of fog effects when I can use them in multiples. Like, there is a turbo fog strategy you could use in limited, and basically you attack in and then you don't have to worry about the crackback because you have one of these in your hand, and you pull that off maybe a couple times during the course of a game and it lets you win a race. Like, that turbo fog strategy actually can be pretty viable. I don't like running a 1 of these. I just don't think it does enough by itself. But if I have the ability to run a few of them, I might go for it. It's a little bit of a niche style of deck building, but it has been successful for me in the past. Prowler. This one's a 6/6 for 6. not too much to say about it. I mean, it's kind of your classic worm, I guess, in green. No abilities, just kind of there. It is a common, though. I think that's important to note. So if you don't pull one of those awesome rares that you can put in your 6th spot, this is there for you, and it's just fine. It's nothing special, but it's playable and limited. Creeping Molds. This is a reprint, of course, and this does work in this set, obviously, because it can get rid of an artifact, enchantment, or land. Again, it's at the 4-drop this time around, so like that 3-4 seems to be the sweet spot for artifact removal. But again, this time around, this is very main deckable because of the world we're in. Cultivator of Blades. Again, another card I'm really impressed with. I think this could see some play in Modern. Here's what I really like about it. I mean, it feels a little expensive when you think 1/1 for 5, but the abilities are just super pushed. The Fabricate 2 is great, so if I'm in a situation where I already have a big team of maybe servo tokens or Thopter tokens, I can just go ahead and put the counters on here. I have myself a 3/3. Next turn I attack in with everything. Everything gets +3/+3. That's a pretty huge swing, right? Or if I'm in a situation where maybe I'm going a little taller and I could use a couple more attackers to go in with me, then okay, I make the servo tokens. Next turn they're going to be attacking in as 2/2s when this thing attacks, because everything will get the +1/+1, so I'm able to go a little wider. So I have that option, and forget about pumping this thing. I mean, if you pumped it with like the spell we saw a few moments ago, it gets another +2/+2, for example, when it's attacking. Everything else will also get that bonus. That can get pretty crazy pretty quick, especially if you have some trample creatures on your team already. So this card's actually pretty awesome. This could be a blowout in limited, and like I said, I think the power level is there for standard. I'm not sure exactly what the role of green stoppy beatdown is going to be in standard. Like I said, I think we'll get there, if not now, post rotation. Feels like it's getting some real cool cards for that archetype though. Dubious Challenge. This is a very dubious card. I actually used this joke already when it was previewed, but I'll just say this about the card. Here's where I think it's awesome. Commander. This is an awesome commander card. If you try to use this in any sort of competitive one-on-one format, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. Your opponent's going to get the better thing out of the two things, right? There may be ways to craft your deck to make it less of a disadvantage for you, but it's a very high variance regardless, right? However, in Commander, you have a multiplayer game, playing this to get a big creature on your side, and maybe even if it's a better creature on one of your opponent's side, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to attack each other. You could go in and attack somebody else with those creatures, so it's a nice political card where you can kind of say, you know what, if I play this on you, I'll let you take a creature, I'll take a creature, we got to deal with this threat over here. That's where this card kind of shines and actually becomes kind of fun. So, cool commander card. I do like the design, at least in that particular situation. Durable Handicraft. I usually am not a fan of enchantments that come onto the battlefield and do absolutely nothing. This one does absolutely nothing. Now, I do like this one though, unlimited. Here's why. It's still cheap, only costs 2. And even though, I don't know, if you play this on turn 2, it doesn't always feel good if you're trying to be super aggressive, but maybe you play this a few turns later when you can afford to do it, because really it's not going to do a whole lot probably on turn 3 or turn 4 anyway, when you're probably maxing out your curve a little bit. But once you have some extra lands, once you get to maybe turn 5, 6, 7, now all of a sudden you can pay the extra mana to get the +1/+1 counter on things. It starts to become a little bit better, and then I think the payoff, 6 mana to give everything a +1/+1 counter once you get to that point in the game, actually could be really good, especially with some of the other synergies in green. So I would actually play this in limited and be relatively happy with it, I think. But just remember, it doesn't have to be a 2-drop. I mean, just keep to your curve. If you have other creatures to play, just play those, and don't play this until you know you can get value out of it. Elegant Edge Crafters. Now here's a 6-drop that feels a little more impressive to me than the worm we saw earlier. I mean, this has flexibility attached to it. It's a 3/4, but it could be a 4/6 if you wanted it to be, or else it could be a 3/4 with a couple tokens. But I like the fact that if you're up against a team of small creatures, this thing's basically unblockable, and there are going to be some strategies in the game that are going to be mostly small creatures. I mean, white has servo tokens, and even black has a lot of smaller creatures on its team. So I mean, going up against some of those strategies, this card becomes even more powerful. And even if you're not, I mean, it's still sizable for what you're paying for it. Fairgrounds Trumpeter. This card is cool if you have ways to put counters on creatures. If you have enough of those in your limited deck, then run this. If you don't, then I'd probably skip it. But green does have a lot of ways to do it, so most of the time I think this is still playable. Now, if I'm paying 3 for a 2/2 and I don't have a lot of ways to put counters on things, this is a very unexciting card, like I said. But there's times where you'll be able to run this and be happy with it. Gira Por Guide. This is a 3/2 for 3, so that's a very decent body in limited, and then the ability I think is just gravy on top. It's not always going to work, it's not always going to come into play, but when it does, I think it's a bonus. I think this card is just fine for a 3-drop anyway. Highspire Artisan. This is actually a great blocker against small flyers. I mean, white's got a bunch of them, blue's got a few too. If you're in those matchups, this might be a card you sideboard in. But you know, it's also a Fabricate card, so if you're all in on Fabricate, then you may be main decking this anyway to begin with. But regardless, it's definitely limited playable, whether it's coming out of the sideboard or starting in your main deck. Hunt the Week. This is a reprint, so you're probably relatively familiar with it, but it's actually a pretty strong limited removal card for green. I mean, it feels a tad expensive at 4, but it does everything green wants to do in this set. I mean, it's going to help you take out a creature. It's also going to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, which does, as we've seen, matter in a lot of instances. So this is perfectly fit into this set. Really nice choice for reprint, and I'm always happy to run even a couple of these in my green deck. It is strong removal. We are going to look at another piece of green removal in just a few minutes. It's actually really strong too, but this one is, I've never been disappointed by this one. I'll just say that. Kujar Seed Sculptor. We haven't seen too many 2-drops from green yet. This is actually a real good one. Look at it this way. I pay 2, I put this into play, and if I don't have anything better to do with the counter, I got myself a 2/3 for 2. Yeah, that's actually incredibly economical. So great 2-drop in limited for green. I always say this, I mean, 2-drops are the most important part of your limited deck. If you can get 2-drops like this, you'll be very happy. Larger Than Life. I like this card a lot, actually. It's a sorcery, so you can't use it as a combat trick, but it only costs 2, and it gives +4/+4 and gives something trample till end of turn. That can put away a game if you have a large enough creature on your side. That's a pretty big swing right there. So I think first off, this potentially could see some play in standard. I think it's actually that strong to just get huge amounts of damage across at one time, and this will be great for you in limited. It's a great card to play 1 or 2 of in a deck, especially if you have big creatures to back it up, like if you're in Gruul colors, or even if you just have some of these big green creatures. Long Tusk Up. So speaking of amazing 2-drops, this one is awesome too. 2/2 for 2, that would be fine on its own. On top of that though, when it deals combat damage, you get 2 energy counters, and oh, by the way, whenever you pay 2 energy into it, it gets a +1/+1 counter. That's phenomenal. So what's nice about this is the card's so cheap that you can put this out on turn 2, start attacking in as a 3/3 even on turn 3, and you're just getting crazy value. Your opponent is going to either have to do something to this card to destroy it, and that might trade up considering it's only a 2-drop, or they're going to have to keep chump blocking with their servo tokens, and eventually that's going to eat into their strategy, or else they bite the bullet and take it, and you have more energy to perhaps pump this up or do something else with it. And on top of that, there's a lot of ways to get energy in green. If you're partnered with red or blue, there's even more ways to get energy. This card just seems awesome to me. I do think, again, it's another card that will see standard play. It's just strong enough to get there. Nature's Way. Now this is the card I was alluding to earlier. This is premium removal for green. It's sorcery speed, but it only costs 2. You get to choose one of your creatures, and it will just do its damage based on its power to another creature. Hopefully what you can do here is, if you have one big creature on board, you use this to take out their best creature, and then by doing that, your big creature gets vigilance and trample. So then you can just attack in. You don't have to worry about a crackback because you got vigilance. You have trample to get more damage across and be able to perhaps in some situations even close out a game if you have a large enough creature. This is actually pretty awesome. I do expect this actually to probably even see standard play, even though standard typically shied away from these type of removal spells because they are a little conditional. You have to have a creature in play. But I think the format's going to present itself that having at least 1 or 2 big creatures on the battlefield shouldn't be too hard to complement this card, since it only costs 2. So I think it could get there. But regardless, it's going to be really good and limited for you. Nissa, Vital Force. I actually like Nissa a lot. You know, she's a 5 casting cost planeswalker, which you're expecting a lot from, but I think she gives you a lot. And here's the deal. A lot of people have kind of said her ultimate just feels really underpowered. It is a weaker ultimate by all means, but the reason they designed it that way simply is because she can ultimate very, very quickly. And she has 5 loyalty counters when she comes into play, and she can ultimate with a -6. So if you made her ultimate too good, they would have had to either up the number of minus that it would take to do it, or they would have to lower the loyalty that she comes in with. And when you're talking about a 5 mana planeswalker, I mean, you want her to come in with a fair amount of loyalty, right? So I think this is actually really good design. Here's ultimately what I like about her. A couple things. Let's talk about her first 2 abilities first, even before we get to the ultimate. I mean, her +1, it defends her. You can untap a land you control, which you could use to get additional mana, and that's a thing too, or else you just use it as a 5/5 creature until your next turn. It has haste, you can attack in with it even if you just played the land, or you can use it as a blocker if you need to. I think that's a pretty awesome +1. -3, oh, by the way, that's Regrowth. Regrowth, one of the best Magic cards probably ever printed. Why not throw that on here too? Sometimes a Regrowth is good enough to win you a game. I mean, you've had a chance to play with Den Protector probably, right, in the last standard format. This is an amazing ability. This can do some crazy work for you. And let's talk about that ultimate now. I mean, yes, it isn't a game-winning sweeping effect. It's more of an attrition effect. But what's really cool is it can happen just so fast. I mean, you can play her, and then the next turn, if you want to, you can ultimate her. Or she combos really well with Oath of Gideon. If you have an Oath in play, then you put her into play. She's automatically 6. You can immediately ultimate her if you want to. There's also another card we're going to look at tomorrow that's an artifact which would allow you to ultimate her the turn that she comes into play too. So there's just so many options with this card. And you know what? Every time you drop a land, you draw a card. If your opponent can't deal with you within the next couple turns, you're going to start running away with that game just through sheer card advantage. That's actually pretty awesome. I mean, imagine the mid to late game where every time you draw a land, it's not flooding, it's actually more card draw, so you get to basically replace it and try the next card. That's incredible. That is the type of attrition effect that wins games. She's going to see standard play. I think she's going to actually be pretty amazing in the right deck. And yes, goes without saying, she's a bomb in limited. Another fun commander card, another good cube card too. Ornamental Courage, and this is a fine combat trick in limited. I mean, nothing to write home about. It's a little more defensive than it is offensive, but that's okay. Sometimes that's a good thing. But it's only 1 green, instant speed. I don't mind running one of these probably in my deck. Ovaya Pashiri Sage Life Crafter. This is an amazing commander card, first off, I want to say, because it just feels so good to me in commander. She is legendary, so she can be your commander. Sometimes 1-drop commanders are kind of fun because they're easy to cast repeatedly. She's a great mana sink, especially in a game like Commander, where you probably will have a lot of expendable mana at some point. She can make tokens, and then she can start making larger creatures based on the number of creatures you already control. It's really cool. She's also eligible to be a tiny leader, so I just want to notate that as well. Really cool card there. She is also a limited bomb, another great mana sink for the late game to just be relevant all of the time. A 1-drop that's relevant through the whole game is very rare to find. So when you do come across that, it's extremely playable and limited. Now in standard, I don't know if she'll quite get there, because I do think she's asking a lot of mana for what she's doing, at least in the standard environment. But in limited or commander, for example, this card's awesome. I can see this being fun in some cubes too. Next we have Pima Outrider, another really good card, another really strong creature card at the 4 mana spot. And this time around it's a common, so it'll be easy to pick some of these up. But look at it this way, you could be getting yourself a 4/4 trampler for 4. That feels really good. A 3/3 trampler and a 1/1 token also feels really good for 4. Like, this is fantastic, and it gives you versatility. Also another good target for bouncing or flickering. A very strong card, and there's just so many ways to build counters or give creatures +X/+X till end of turn in green, that these tramplers, I think, really become a commodity. They really become a win condition, really. Riparian Tiger, another really nice trample card. Another one at common too. This time, okay, I'm paying 5 for that 4/4 trample, so one more. But what do I get out of that deal? I get myself 2 energy counters when it comes into play. Oh, and then by the way, I can pump this for every 2 energy counters I get +2/+2. So a trampler that I can pour energy in to make bigger, that's kind of awesome, right? So again, if you're paired up with blue or red definitely is going to play well with these big creatures. You can perhaps have a big pool of energy on your hands. This could be a win condition just flat out for you. You get yourself this 4/4 trampler, you attack in. If you're able to dump even 4 energy into this thing, it becomes an 8/8 trampler to end a turn. Okay, that's amazing. Yeah, notice that it doesn't say just once per turn. A lot of times these type of abilities do on trample creatures, but no, you can pump this as long as you have energy. And again, it doesn't take away from your mana. You could also have another pump spell that you play just off your mana base on top of what you're getting with the energy. I think this is the real deal. This card's actually going to be amazing and limited. Again, it could be a win condition, and again, I do think it can see standard play. It's possibly that strong. Sage of Selya's Claim. I kind of like this card. It's another decent 2-drop. Power and toughness wise, it doesn't feel as impressive as some of the other cards we've seen today, but coming to the battlefield and giving you 3 energy is going to be very relevant at times. If you have good energy payoffs, a 2-drop like this would be kind of nice to have in your deck at some point. So yeah, it pays off for whether you have amazing green spells like that last one we saw, or else maybe you're paired up with Simic or Gruul. There's just so many good payoffs. Servant of the Conduit. This is kind of like your mana dork for the set. Like, what they did that was smart this time though is they made it a 2/2 bounty for 2, so you feel a lot better about playing it just as a regular 2-drop creature no matter what. They didn't make it like a 1/1 or 1/2 or 2/1, so okay, I feel a little better about that. Also, it does give you 2 energy when it comes into the battlefield. That's important, and it lets you get a mana of any color, so it also can color fix aside from ramping. So this card does a lot for 2 mana. I kind of miss the 1-drop mana dorks. Sure, I think we all do. But if you're going to give me a 2-drop mana dork, this is actually a pretty good one. If I'm trying to go deep with colors, this will allow me to do it. Typically, if you're trying to like splash a third color or something like that, a card like this, you may only need to use the ability to get a different color a couple times. And at that point, then either you've used the cards you're splashing or you got like the basic land you needed to come out finally, you know. So it's typically not something you're going to have to use through the whole game. So you don't have to keep expending energy on this, but it's nice in the early game to make sure you can still play your spells. So I kind of like that. And it's also ramp. If ramp's important to you, you can use it when you need it. You just have to pay the energy into it. Take Down. This is a very good sideboard card for limited. Deals with flying creatures. So if your opponent's got some flying creatures, wonderful. It can deal with a 4 toughness one, or it can deal with a bunch of Thopter tokens if that's what's going on. So a lot of versatility here. I think potentially this could see some standard play on a sideboards too. Thriving Rhino. So this is the last one in this cycle where the creature can attack and then you can pay energy into it to give it a +1/+1 counter. The green one's not bad. I think the red one's probably my favorite. It just feels super economical. This one might be my second favorite though. I don't mind playing a 2/3 for 3 even if I never use the ability. And again, it's another source of energy. Verdurous Gearhog. Now here's another mythic for today, and this one is the last of the Gearhog cycle. These all have been amazing. This may be one of my favorites. It's just so much value. 4/4 trampler, and you get to distribute 4 +1/+1 counters wherever you want for 5 mana. So you can make this an 8/8 trampler creature for 5 in theory if you want to do that. That won't always be the best play, but you could do that. That's awesome. Another card that works really well with bounce, flicker effects. This card is just incredible. It just feels super pushed. Can be a win condition on its own, or you just spread out the counters if you have other trampled creatures to ensure that one removal spell won't take all the value out of this card. Because look at it this way, if I play this and I move my 4 counters to other trampled creatures and this thing gets hit with spot removal, I still feel like I got my money's worth for 5 mana, quite honestly. That's pretty awesome. I mean, these are all super pushed. This will see standard play. Potentially this could see some modern play, I think. I don't know where it fits exactly. I would like to try it maybe in an infect deck and see if I can just move the counters onto some of the infect creatures at the 5-drop, if that is too slow. I don't know. I'd like to try it anyway. But aside from that, I think it will find a home somewhere. Again, another amazing commander card. Great cube card. I'd like to see a cube switch out Titans for these Gearhogs. I think that would be cool. Wildest Dreams. Okay, so this is like a ramped up regrowth spell, right? I think most of the time this is going to be green and 2 and regrow 1 card. And you know what? That's probably just good enough. The times that it's more than that, wonderful. Bonus on top, that's phenomenal. But I think just regrowing 1 card's good enough. I mentioned earlier, just like Den Protector, this is a very, very powerful ability, and I think it's good enough to potentially see some standard play if there's a deck out there that needs this, but it's going to be great for you in limited for sure. Wild Wanderer. This is a color fixing card. If you want to fix your color, or perhaps you want to ramp a little bit, that's really what you want to use this for. If you're not in that business, then a 3/2 for 4 doesn't feel great. But let's face it, in limited, there ain't nothing wrong with a little ramp. I mean, you can get some value out of that even if you're not trying to ramp into something huge, right? And this is definitely going to shine if you're in a 3rd color or splashing a color. Willie Bandar. This is actually kind of interesting to me because this is kind of like the new regeneration. Paying to make something indestructible to end a turn is replacing regeneration going forward, is more of kind of the quote-unquote evergreen way of doing that. And I think that makes sense. Regeneration was always very confusing for new players, and it wasn't very intuitive that it taps when it regenerates. And this is more powerful in a way because it doesn't tap when you make it indestructible, so that's actually kind of cool. So this card could be cool if you have a lot of ways to give it tokens. So if you feel like you're going to be able to pump this pretty significantly over the course of a game, then I don't mind playing it. If I'm not real confident about that, then I probably won't play it in limited, but it will make some decks. I think it could be quite good if you could throw some counters on it. Alright, let's move on to some of the multicolor cards. And we have the lone Selesnya card today, and this one is actually kind of cool. I mean, it costs 5, it's a sorcery, so it's more like an aggressive card, not a combat trick. But you can give a creature +5/+5 and trample. Okay, that could actually be game ending. That's kind of awesome. Or if you're in the business to go wide, maybe you have a lot of tokens or something on the battlefield, you can give them all +2/+2 in vigilance. So you can get across a lot of damage, and also you don't have to necessarily fear a crackback because of the vigilance. This is a very, very good card, and it's kind of cool because it totally works for Selesnya. White has a lot of the small creatures, they might be making a lot of tokens, so that second ability kind of makes sense for white, where green is a lot bigger with the trample ability tied into it. You could just get in for some crazy damage all at once, so it kind of feels very green to me. So really good card design here. I think it might be a little too expensive and conditional for standard for the most part, but I do think it will be good and limited for sure. Alright, last 2 cards of the day are going to be Simic cards. This one's an energy card, which you could probably imagine when you see Simic colors. 2/3 for 3 with flying and trample. You know what? That's a pretty nice sized creature on its own. Granted, it's 2 different colors you have to pay for it, so you do take that into account, but it's still a very economical creature. Oh, and then by the way, every time it deals combat damage, you get that many energy counters. So if you hit somebody for 2, that's 2 energy counters. If you pump this up, make it say a 4/4 with that +2/+2 we saw earlier, and now you're getting 4 energy counters just with this creature. It has trample, so even if they block it, you could get some value out of it. I really like this a lot. This is a very, I think, economical way to build your energy pool into some good payoffs. So yeah, I'm going to play this in limited and be super, super happy to do so if I'm in those colors. And I do think this potentially, if there's a Simic deck out there that wants energy at some point, is strong enough to see standard play. It just depends on whether that deck can hang in the meta, I think. Finally, our last card of the day, it's actually another mythic. It's the first time we've seen 3 mythics in a day. This is Rashmi, Eternities Crafter. This card's bonkers. This is maybe one of my favorite cards in the set. This is nuts. Okay, first, it's legendary. So, yes, it can be a commander. That's kind of awesome. I get a 2/3 for 4. Okay, that's fine on paper, but let's talk about this ability. Basically, every time you play a spell, minimally, you're drawing a card. And if the card you turn costs less than the spell you cast, you get to just play it for free. So you're either casting a free spell, or you're putting a card in your hand. That is incredible. Your opponent needs to get rid of this really, really quick, or you're going to run away with card advantage. You're just going to run away with the game. This is insane. Yes, it is a little fragile with 3 toughness, and it should be, because this thing really needs to be taken out quick, or else the game's just over. Let's face it. I mean, this card's incredible. If you can protect this thing, you're in a real good position. This will see standard play. I think this could see some modern play as well. It's just that good. And like I said, this will be a commander. I think this is a build-around card, and another cool card for cubes for sure. This one, I think we're going out on a high note today. This one's awesome. So having said that, those are all the green cards and now all the multicolor cards. So we've wrapped all those up. Tomorrow we're going to be back with all of the artifacts and lands, and then the following day we'll do our pre-release primer. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, if you've seen our other pre-release primers, you probably know what to expect. It's just more or less what you should bring to the pre-release, what you can expect to see there, what kind of mechanics are in the set, what kind of archetypes you want to look for when you build your deck. But I'm also going to talk about inventions as well in that video. So having said that, until tomorrow, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality content for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't yet had a chance to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.